Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live, the online learning community for student affairs educators in higher education. I am your host, Heather Shea Gasser from Michigan State University, and today we are talking about supporting Muslim students on campus. You can participate in our online learning community today by following along on Twitter and by tweeting to the Higher Ed Live hashtag. Thank you to my friend and MSU colleague, Alex Lang, for monitoring our Student Affairs Live back channel today. Before we get on with the show, I need to recognize our show's sponsors. Student Affairs Live is a part of the Higher Ed Live network, where free live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in student affairs live. You can tune in to our show with my co-host, the amazing Tony Duty, and me every other Wednesday. Typically, we have a show on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Everything starts with your brand. If you can't articulate who you are, every communication is a wasted opportunity. Join senior strategist Joel Pattison on M. Stoner's next free webinar to get a jump start on your 2016 brand strategy. We are tweeting out a link where you can learn more and register. Student Affairs Live is also exclusively sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of an innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. There are only 10 days left to get the early bird rate for ACPA 2016 in Montreal, so please click on the link now and learn why you should join us. Now on with today's show. Last year's ACPA keynote by Eboo Patel sparked several conversations within circles of student affairs professionals around religious pluralism. I knew then that I wanted to bring this topic to Student Affairs Live to continue the conversation. And last June, Faran Saeed reached out to me, and together we began brainstorming, planning, and dreaming of who we'd want to join today's show. When we began planning the show, we knew the topic would attract attention, and then after the tragic terrorist attacks last month, today's episode becomes even more relevant as anti-Islamic sentiment has both increased and become more recognized on college and university campuses, reflecting the political rhetoric and Islamophobia in the media. Our four panelists today, Eboo Patel, Faran Saeed, Maria Ahmad, and Hamza Khan, are joining me to continue this conversation with Eboo at ACPA. So their complete bios are posted on the website that we're tweeting out a link to now. Our aim is to have an open conversation about how we, as student affairs professionals, scholars, and social justice educators, can engage all students in conversations about religious pluralism and inclusion in order to better support Muslim students, faculty, and staff on our campuses. So thank you to the four of you for being here today. I am so grateful. We're going to start by having each of you briefly share a little bit about your background. Through your careers, how is this topic of supporting Muslim students on campus, both personally and professionally, relevant for you? Eboo, let's start with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Heather. Faran, thank you for starting the ball rolling on this. I'm thrilled to be here with this great group of people and for everybody who's joining us. So my name is Eboo Patel. I am the founder and president of an organization called Interfaith Youth Core. We work with college campuses, with higher education networks, with faculty, with students, with student affairs professionals on religious diversity issues on campus. We have a model that we call Building Religious Pluralism, which is basically in three parts. Number one, to support people's various identities, whether that's Muslim or Hindu or Christian or atheist, whether it's straight or gay, whether it's black or white. You support people in their identities. Part two is you nurture positive relationships between people from different identities. And number three is you facilitate positive engagement with the common good, whether that common good is a campus community or a city or a state or the nation or the world. We all live within the health of the whole. So that's what I do professionally. It very much emerges from my experience as an undergraduate at the University of Illinois in the early to mid 1990s. It was an inflection point in the multicultural movement. It feels, frankly, I think a lot like campuses do now. There was a lot of talk around race, gender, class, ethnicity, and sexuality issues. One of the areas that was missing from that matrix was religious identity. And so as I was deeply involved in conversations around race and ethnicity and gender and sexuality and social justice issues, and at the same time kind of developing my spiritual identity, which would ultimately become a strong Muslim identity, I felt supported and nurtured in the range of other identities that I was exploring and developing and solidifying. But there was literally no conversation at all about religious identity issues. And that was frustrating. It was frustrating at a personal level because I was on this kind of spiritual search myself at the time. But it was also frustrating at a campus and kind of global level because religious diversity issues were playing a prominent role in the world, and there was no conversation about that when it came to diversity discussions on campus. So the long and short of it is that that was the inspiration for building Interfaith Youth Core, and that's why we work really exclusively with higher education and campuses and students.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful. Maria, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So right now I'm working at Indiana University Kokomo, which is a regional campus of Indiana University, as a coordinator for student life and campus diversity. I got into higher ed probably a lot like most people do, kind of falling upon it. I was involved as an undergrad, and I went to the Ohio State University. My parents let me go to campus, the main campus, only to have Muslim friends. We grew up in a small town. There were no Muslims, really. There were only a handful. So they're like, okay, you can go away to college just so you can have that Muslim community. And I did. I joined the MSA, the Muslim Student Association, became the president, and then also joined the national organization at one point. And my college years really shaped who I was as a leader and who I am as a Muslim. What I believe and how I practice were shaped through my college years. And I really, truly believe that when we say student development, we see that development in students, and I saw that within myself. And that's why I chose to go through this career path and really working in diversity, and like Eboo said, making faith and spirituality a part of diversity, a part of student development, and continuing that on.
Great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Faran, tell us a little bit about you. Thank you to your work behind the scenes.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm Faran Saeed. I'm currently a new professional working as the Volunteer Programs Coordinator at Madison House, which is a nonprofit that's affiliated with University of Virginia. And I work mainly with service and service learning initiatives. This is Muslim students are something that's really important because I identify as a Muslim. A lot of the issues that students are struggling that are of that faith, I struggled with. And so, your identity, and I never had a support system. Even though I went to a school that was diverse and had an MSA, sometimes you felt like an outsider. And so I want to be that individual personally to support people and know that, if there's issues that you are struggling with, I've struggled with them as well. And I want to be able to provide that support. Professionally, something that's really important to me because my research interest is Muslim identity development formation. I really want to brand myself around that. So there's not a lot of literature out there in terms of supporting college Muslim students in higher education, and so I want to be that individual that can be the person that people come to when it's talk about topics about this. College was a way that I developed, and it might sound cliche, but the reason I went into higher education was because I want to be that person that bridges that gap between the faith and higher education, because there's not a lot of people in student affairs in higher education that are Muslim that are in this field, and I want to be that person.
Thank you. Hamza.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for organizing this. I'm the coordinator of student affairs creative at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. And the topic of supporting Muslim students on campus is professionally relevant to me as somebody who is responsible for animating the presence of the work being done by student affairs here at Ryerson. We have a very diverse student population comprised of hundreds, if not thousands, of Muslim students. And in my work, I strive to ensure that our marketing and communications is not only inclusive of these populations, but it's compelling for them. And like everyone else here and attending this webinar, I'm obsessed with reaching students on the fringe, students who aren't yet in contact with the programs, services, and events that we offer. And I want to do everything that I can to understand these students, their unique needs, behaviors, expectations, and then find ways to bring them into our universe. And personally, I can speak to the transformative powers of student affairs to sort of activate students personally, professionally, and academically. Student affairs came into my life at a time where I didn't really feel comfortable with myself. And as a first-generation South Asian and Muslim student, it gave me the experiences and the vocabulary that I needed to own my own narrative, my multiple intersecting personalities and identities, and shape myself into the person that I am today, and certainly the person that I want to be for the rest of my life. And I know that if it worked for me, it's similar to what Faran said, it can work for others who share my similar background, intersections, and life experiences.
Excellent. Faran, why don't you start by talking broadly about some of the primary issues facing Muslim college students? And we spent a little bit of time talking about how much kind of Islamic Faith 101 we should incorporate into the show. We're not going to do a lot of that here. We're going to tweet out some links for folks if you haven't already gained that knowledge, but you'll probably incorporate some of that into your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's three main things that really stand out to me in terms of issues that I've perceived and other students have kind of advocated to me. One is Islamophobia. You've seen it. It's in the news with things that happened at Virginia Tech, where an individual wrote on one of the residential halls, "Kill all Muslims." And so that was an issue, the chapel shooting. So Islamophobia itself, and just even the backlash of that, is an issue that students are facing today. I think the second thing is a prayer space, having a centrally located prayer space. As a Muslim, one of your key tenets is to pray 5 times a day. And so having a space where students can go and actually, practice their faith without feeling, ashamed or, worried about anything, I think that's an issue that students are facing. And the third thing that I think it's a really relevant issue is Muslim students are struggling with embracing their identity in a Christian-centric society. You look at it, I struggle with it. Students come to me in terms of, how do I embrace my identity as a Muslim in an area where it might not necessarily line up with your religious values, your personal values, or whatnot. And that simple thing is, Maria was touched on, she went to school to just have Muslim friends. I grew up not interacting with any person that was not my same faith until I got to college. And so that is something that I know going in that people struggle to keep their identity, especially when there's so many different outside factors that play a role into that. So those are the three things that I think, from my perspective, and students have told me that they are facing.
Can you talk a little bit about how the issues that you talked about maybe vary based on campus context, the state environment, the presence or absence of Muslim student associations or other community-based supports?
Yeah, definitely. I think those issues are still relevant. They just might not be in the forefront based on those issues that you listed. I think if you're looking at geographic location, I think particularly the South, it's really hard, and it's not really diverse in terms of religious diversity or even a population. I'll look at my previous institution at LSU. It's not very open. People don't know a lot about the Muslim Student Association. People aren't reaching out to that organization. And it's not just those individuals, people reaching out to that group of students, it's vice versa as well, because it's a culture of fear. I think that's another thing. I think another thing that you have to look in terms of the issues, it might not necessarily be out front, like I said, but those conversations, those religious microaggressions, those are still happening even at institutions where diversity, it's part of the diversity initiatives. And I think it's just because people just don't know exactly how to respond to those issues. And sometimes I think to take into those different issues, those contexts, you just got to understand there's a culture of learning, a culture of understanding, and then at the end of the day, we're all humans, and that's what I hope people realize. But then again, those issues are still relevant, and they are seen within those different contexts. But again, people are still might be saying the same stuff, but might just be saying it in a way that they don't realize.
Yeah. So we spend a lot of time in student affairs master's programs talking about identity development.
Mm-hmm.
Hamza, could you talk a little bit about if there is a model, or what a model of Muslim student identity development might look like, or what resources we might point folks towards?
Yeah, great question. I think growing up in a South Asian Muslim enclave for most of my life, I've had to learn to separate identity from appearance. And context and juxtaposition really can skew what a Muslim student identity looks like. I mean, for starters, it's not just South Asian. It's not just a hijab. It doesn't just look like Faran, Eboo, and myself. It doesn't look like Maria. I mean, Muslims are black, white, purple from all different walks of life and backgrounds. Faran and I met for the first time at ACPA last year, and it was eye-opening to see how, despite having very similar backgrounds, and being in the same age range, that we've had very different experiences of being Muslim students. And I imagine that Muslim students on campus today share both in the good and the bad. On the one hand, I mean, we're rooted in the really beautiful tenets of the faith, which are namely like service, community, education, tolerance, excellence. But I'm sure we'll get into this throughout the webinar. These values are now tinged with stress, anxiety, dissonance, and in some cases, embarrassment.
That's good. Ron, anything you'd add? I know this is a scholarly area for you.
Yeah, I think through the research, while there has been very little research on this topic, what research has been out there is very relevant. You know, there's three key things that they've identified as what kind of makes up a Muslim's identity, and one has to be the religious aspect of it. So you're talking about praying 5 times a day, and so that simple thing is scheduling your classes around that prayer schedule, or even asking your professor, hey, can I have 5 minutes to step aside and, you know, do something that's really part of my faith. Another thing, part of the Muslim faith is, you know, charity, and so charity in a way can be as giving back to the community through service. So doing community service, that's part of the identity. A second aspect of that is the cultural piece, like Hamza pointed out. You know, Muslims are not just what him and I look like. It's, you know, people that are black, white, whatever, but they're also from different backgrounds in terms of they're Pakistani, they're Arab, they're Indian, they're different backgrounds, and then you can kind of see that through their identity in terms of the language they speak at home, the traditional clothing, the wedding styles, whatnot. And then the third part that really encompasses in terms of their identity is that Western American identity in terms of what the society is, the simple things as, you know, holidays and, you know, interactions with the opposite sex and stuff like that, that also accumulates in terms of what a Muslim student's identity looks like.
Maria or Eboo, anything you'd like to add? I mean, I think both of you have talked a little bit about your own identity experiences, and I know, Eboo, you've written about this a fair amount in your books. You know, what about intersectionality? I mean, I think we've talked about kind of a model, but religion, gender, you know, class, race, and culture kind of make that maybe one model challenging. Maria, do you want to start, and then I'll go to Eboo?
Sure. Definitely. Even looking within just even faith before even starting intersectionality, you know, within the Muslim spectrum, there are students who may not identify with other Muslims because they're like, oh, the other Muslims on campus are too conservative or they're too liberal. And sometimes there's just that perception, even, you know, though they're all just struggling to figure out what they really want, how they really want to practice. I think that's the biggest challenge that Muslim students have. That may be like the overarching actual place where we can come to, like, actually having a model, is having that struggle, right? You're deciding how Muslim do I want to be, and how much of a typical college student do I want to be. Do I want to go out to this party and have a drink, even though I think I'm not supposed to, or do I go to the party, hold a drink, not drink it, or do I not go to the party at all? So there's that commonality of all the struggles that maybe Muslims are facing, and then on top of that, there's the other identity, right, that Faran mentioned about your background, your ethnicity, or, you know, are you a convert to Islam? Because a lot of times converts may not look like your typical Muslim. They may not be who people expect Muslims to be. So they have another whole perception of when people are talking to them, or even when Muslims are talking to them. And gender, I know we're going to get to that later, but a Muslim woman's experience is going to be totally different than somebody who identifies as a male or a man. And I've seen that on so many panels where the guys are always like, yeah, you know, I don't see islamophobia as much, or, you know, I don't feel scared or have fear when I go out, whereas a lot of times the women do. And you can see that kind of across even gender in general. So there's that overlapping, even if it is different faiths or non-faiths, and then there is that similar common factor as well.
Right. Eboo, what are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think what everybody's saying is important and profound. I think the one thing that I would add is that for kind of traditional age college students, 18 to 22 years old, this is a time when identities are live, where they're in formation. Whereas Mario was saying, people are deciding what they want to be and how they want to live, what their patterns of being, behaving, and believing are going to be. And so, I mean, I think that it is entirely natural. It's par for the course for 18-year-old Muslim young person to go to a party and to be having an internal conversation about whether he or she should drink or dance or engage in a particular way with the opposite sex or explore a particular dimension of his own or her own sexual identity. I think that that's all natural. I think that that's what college is about, and that's what identity formation is about. I think that the significant challenge we are looking at right now is what happens when you introduce serious prejudice into that atmosphere. And so it's not just who do I want to be as Ali or Fatima or Muhammad at IU or at Madison or at Texas Austin, right? It's how do I deal with the fact that I've got family in Syria and we have presidential candidates talking about barring Muslim refugees fleeing extremism in Syria from coming into this country. That's my cousin you're talking about, right? And how do I deal with the fact that that's like on CNN and Fox News every day, all the time, and I can't walk through the student center without seeing it up on the TV, and I'm always wondering if the folks who are looking at that are looking at me and laughing, right? And this is, I mean, it's what lead poisoning does to the brain, prejudice does to identity formation. It warps it, right? And so all these Muslim kids are living in this atmosphere right now. They are living in an atmosphere in which the poison of prejudice is introduced, and only they can smell it, right? There's a bunch of other people who don't even know it's there because they just think that Donald Trump is a buffoon, and what kind of clown would say that? But I'm telling you, when he is looped on Fox News or CNN all the time, and you're that Muslim kid, you pay attention, right? And it like restricts the oxygen flow into your identity system. And I think, as Hamza, Faran, and Maria all said, I think that a big part of the challenge around this is that the professionals in your environment, your RA, your RD, your diversity director, who care about identity and who are aware of different dimensions of diversity, seem totally oblivious to your religious identity, right? Seem totally oblivious to the poison that you are breathing and how that's warping your identity. And so you're thinking to yourself, hey, you know, I really appreciate you doing this crossing the line exercise around race and gender and class. Super important. Haven't thought about all that stuff. I'm glad you're making me think about it. But do you have any idea what it feels like to be named Ali, you know, at this particular time in American history? How come that never comes up, right? And that's like that is a really hard thing for a 19-year-old who's wondering whether she should go to the party and dance, right? That's just being 19, and she also has to deal with that loop on CNN and wondering how come the RD, whenever he runs a diversity exercise, never brings up her diversity.
I want to ask a follow-up to that, because I'm really curious about why this is, like, why are student affairs professionals and those are, you know, why are we so averse to talking about religious inclusion, and specifically naming it that, you know, Muslim students as a whole may be having a very different college experience, and we have yet to really unpack that as a profession. What do you think, Eboo?
I mean, it is the dimension of diversity that is either left out or stated in simply an offhand way. I think that there's perhaps a variety of reasons for it. Number one, you know, religion, religious identity, religious diversity is extremely complicated, right? There are a million scholarly arguments about what a religion is or what a religious identity is. So I get how complicated it is. It's a massive knowledge base, and you think to yourself, how am I ever going to know even the first 5 things, forget the next 500 things? But I don't think it's any more complicated than race or gender or sexuality, right? And so just as the student affairs profession has spent the last 30 or 40 years making a decision that it is going to be on the vanguard of other identities, I just think that the profession has to make a decision that it's going to be on the vanguard of this identity. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is that religious identity is too often viewed as the oppressor. And so people have stories of, you know, I grew up in a small town and everybody was this type of Christian or that type of Muslim, and they didn't let me be myself, whether that self was gay or creative or an artist. Look, I get that. That has to be owned. It is the case. But to suggest that religious identity is only and ever always the oppressor is to have an extremely two-dimensional view of religious identity. And to suggest that it is it's the only oppressor of certain identities is also to see narrowly, right? I mean, the fact is there are many countries who have actual governmental laws against homosexuality. And nobody ever says to the Indian Student Association or to an African Students Association, hey, look, I don't like your identity because your government has a law against homosexuality, right? You allow that group to self-identify, and it doesn't have to carry all the baggage of even its government's democratically passed laws. I mean, I think that ought to be the same thing for an evangelical Christian group or a Muslim group or a Hindu group, that they shouldn't have to carry all the negative baggage of their religious community. They get to define themselves in relationship to their historic tradition and in their relationship to contemporary times.
What you talked about as far as the climate on campus really, I think is relevant. It's important. It's important for us all to be conscious of. And I think, you know, as we all know, since 9/11, that climate has been largely negative. And as we witnessed through social media, which has just, I think, increased awareness that there is Islamophobia. It's not necessarily Islamophobia is any larger. It's just more awareness. Can you all talk about how that backlash, you know, specifically since the Paris terrorist attacks, has impacted Muslim students and their ability to be successful on campus? Eboo, do you want to start, and then we'll go down the line?
Sure. I'll just say something real quick. You know, two things. One is, so I remember being at a Midwestern campus a couple years ago, and I'm in the student center. I'm preparing my evening talk, and there's a couple students looking at CNN, and it's you know, some story of some terrible terrorist bombing, and they have the B-roll of a terrorist training camp, and you know, these people, like, I don't know, hopping over hurdles in this terrorist training camp, and these two young women in hijabs and headscarves walk by, and these dudes are eating their dinner. They look up at the news report, they point to the screen, and they point to these two young women, and they say, maybe they're related. And because I'm sitting at the table next to them, I hear them, the two young women don't hear them, but I'm like, I'm livid, right? And I'm thinking to myself, like, that's the cloud that those 19-year-old women live under every day. And they know that, right? And there's actually a social science term for that, and it's called availability bias, which is, it basically means what human psychology does is it generalizes to entire populations the small piece of information they know about that population. So if all you know about Islam is what you see on CNN, or what you know or the Paris attacks or 9/11, human psychology means you generalize that knowledge to all Muslims, including the two 19-year-old women in headscarves walking next to you in the student center. That's extremely dangerous. By the way, I think that this is exactly why student affairs took on diversity and multicultural issues front and center over the last 30 or 40 years, is they recognized that, you know, what too many people knew about black students or lesbians or Latinos were things that they saw in popular media. They thought to themselves, hey, this is not good. It's not good for our campus. It's not good for those students. It's not good for any student. It's not good for our country and the world. It seems to me that that kind of proactive building of an appreciative knowledge base about Muslims and Islam needs to happen given the availability of really ugly information and the natural biases in human psychology to generalizing to all students.
Faran, your thoughts on how this is affecting Muslim students' success?
I think it's impacting because they're focused on so many different factors instead of focusing on why they're really in school. And so that's grades, and that's making new friends, and, you know, having that really typical college experience. You know, for example, I have a cousin who attends a university, and his name is Osama. You know how many times he gets the butt of jokes because of that? That's something that he has to worry about every single day, to the point where my aunt and uncle asked him if he wanted to change his name. Those are some things that you don't really have to worry about. You shouldn't have to. And so it's really affecting them. So they're really focusing on, instead of focusing on their school and their academics, they're focusing on, oh, this issue is happening. How is my family going to be? Especially if their family are doing things or they're out in the public a lot. My mom is, she's Muslim. She wears a headscarf. The other day she had someone, a 4-year-old, point at her and said, is that a terrorist? That's something it's just inbreeded, and those kind of things are happening on college campus. So they're worried more about necessarily instead of their academics, but worried about those conversations. And so, I'm comfortable with my identity where I don't let things affect me. But if you have an 18-year-old, 19-year-old who's coming from a background where they've always been around Muslim people all their lives, and they're coming to an institution where people from different diverse backgrounds are there, and then they're seeing that every single day, it gets to you, and that's affecting you. So that could be their mental health, that can be their grades are slipping, that they're worried about other things. I look at things that are happening at University of Virginia, and so this Paris attack happened, and so there is an atmosphere of a big elephant in the room where nothing's being said. It's where someone sees a Muslim student and kind of avoids them. And that's something that shouldn't be the case. And so it's other information. And I think what we need to do in terms of being successful in terms of preventing this stuff is just realizing that at the end of the day, these people are humans. These students are coming for the exact same reasons why. And then if we are making this a point where we are saying, I've had students kind of joke about topics like Islamophobia or something like that. If you give power to them, that's causing worse effect on yourself. And so taking that time to getting to know that you're humans. But I've seen that in terms of the things that are happening, in terms of the impact. Students are worrying more about their families, what people are saying, the grades are slipping. I am the advisor for multiple MSAs throughout my career. And so people are coming to questions not necessarily about their grades and things that they should be coming to me about, but they're coming about these issues that they see every single day. And so that's something that I see that they're worrying about.
Hamza, what about you? What do you see?
Yeah, just to riff on what Faran and Eboo said, when these attacks happened, like everyone else, my heart sank. I felt the pain, the sadness for the victims and their families, but as a Muslim, I also felt strong anxiety, exhaustion, and embarrassment, frankly. Anxiety around what the world's reaction would be, exhaustion around having to work that much harder to rebuild our image in society, and embarrassment because I knew that even though ISIS is so far outside the fold of Islam, I mean, like anyone who kills innocent people, they're not considered to be a Muslim at all, that the media would conflate the average Muslim with this radical element. It's just an added layer of stress and friction, which takes a small but regular toll on students. It weighs on their conscience, it puts their backs up, and it wears them down over time. And so distancing myself from the actions of the terrorists is a full-time job. To work against that availability bias, as we described, is a full-time job. I have to always be on because the news cycle is, frankly. It's emotionally and mentally exhausting.
Maria?
Yeah, I would agree with what everybody just said. And to add, I don't think it's just the Paris attacks that triggered this. I think it's the political rhetoric that's been going on. And as election season gets closer, it's just going to continue. I think that's what kind of makes it hard too, where most people who are understand that the acts of a small group doesn't represent the religion or even a mass group of people. But when you see so many people rally and support ideas that are just bizarre, that kind of pushes you back again, because you're trying so hard. You try every day, like Hamza just said, all the time. It's not necessarily. We can't even get to the point of being proactive because we're always having to be reactive to all these issues that are coming up. And it gets tiring. And especially for Muslim students, I think with everything as being a student and being a traditional age student, going through all the things that you go through, having that is just an added layer of stress. And a lot of time for parents as well. I think I've had a lot of parents whose students have told me, my parents don't want me to join the Muslim Student Association, or don't want me to wear the hijab, or don't want me to be identified as a Muslim, even if they personally would like to, because of fear of physical harm, verbal abuse, grades, job outlook, all these things that a typical student is looking for as the hopes of getting an education. And those parents and even some students are like, I can't put myself in a position to come out as who I really am because of fear of backlash. or just of how people may think. It could even be my professor who thinks a certain way, and that may not say anything to me directly, but I kind of feel this. So I'm going to distance myself as much as I can. And having to think about that and not, on top of grades and all that is pretty hard. And all these articles or studies also show that the students, or even the people who are not involved in their mosque or their MSA or have that network, those are the lone wolves that get pulled into radicalization or any other radical thoughts. So having that group of friends or a group of people that you can share those struggles with helps. But if you have that fear of identifying, you can't really get there.
Yeah, so we've been talking about this kind of concept of perception management, and Maria, can you talk a little bit about this need to negotiate other people's reactions to you, navigate that, and specifically regarding female Muslim students, and maybe what other specific additional supports they might need?
Sure. So like I mentioned before, a Muslim woman could go through different experiences than a Muslim man. Maybe because they do wear the scarf, or if they don't wear the scarf and they may be going through the struggle of deciding to wear it or deciding what to wear in general. And that could be threats and pressure from within the Muslim community, from their parents, just from the environment. Because, somebody could be like, hey, yeah, I am Muslim, and other could be like, well, you don't look like one, you don't act like one. And so having to justify who you are to others, it's always on our minds, I feel like. I can't just have a day where I'm just walking down and I'm like, I'm not having a good day. I just want to walk to the store, get my, my lunch, and just sit and eat. You have to consciously think, like, I need to smile at everybody who walks by, because I don't know what that person is thinking. They may be thinking I'm thinking something about them, or just not a good person or not a nice person because of the perceptions they already have. So having that, like Hamza said, being on all the time, and it's a burden. There's also a whole, another part of it where you have to, maybe sit on every kind of committee or every kind of panel, and you're still developing, right? You don't want to be the one representing all Muslims, but you become that token. And every identity group does have that issue, but when you also have the fear of somebody from the audience yelling that, hey, you're a terrorist, or maybe doing something afterwards, there's that other added fear that is very real.
Yeah.
People don't always realize it, but it's there, and it's something we think about all the time. And it's physical fear, and then even getting the education, getting a job. So many times Muslim students are like, do I list my involvement as a Muslim student on my resume or not? Is that something that's actually helping with my leadership skills, or is it hindering? So there's that struggle. Where do I include it? Do I not include it? What kind of jobs can I really get? Can I really get a job as this or that with the name that I have, with the clothes that I wear, or the things that I may have to do? A lot of extra thinking and, struggles.
Yeah. So we had a couple of great questions from Twitter. Mike Prinky asked about the needs of Muslim students, both men and women, in relation to their religion and practice in their residence halls, so students who live on campus. Do any of you want to kind of field that question?
Yeah, so some of the things that I look for in terms of residential halls is, one is having a conversation with that RD, whoever's over that building or whatever, to kind of have an open dialogue. I think that's one thing that I would do it right off the top, is to kind of establish that culture of learning and the culture of understanding. If they want to practice that faith in there, there's also in like residential halls rooms that you can reserve out or set aside for Muslim students. At my undergrad institution, we had a similar situation where we had Muslim students that live on campus. And so one of the ways that we kind of combat that and was able to help them practice that is, one, provide an open space where they can access that in the residential hall. So it can be a small room. It doesn't have to be a lot thing. It's just a room where people can have 5 to 10 minutes to practice and practice without feeling ashamed, practice without feeling people are coming watching them. That's something that I would go about having that conversation. But the simple thing is, sitting down with the MSA and kind of like what their needs are. And I think that's a thing where the Muslim students don't do a good job of advocating for themselves. And then on the other flip side of that, you have individuals who don't necessarily know how to actually address that issue and stuff like that. But the simple thing is someone's got to make the move, and a simple email to the MSA to kind of sit down about what your needs are, and then sitting down with the residential halls and just kind of laying it out on the table, and knowing that a basis that the conversation is going to be there. There might be questions that might be ignorant, but it's for the basis of learning. And so that's something that if you're trying to start something in the residential halls, it's having that culture of learning and culture of understanding, and know that you're there to actually help the individual goes a long way in establishing a prayer space or a small space for students. And then that's what I do in terms of for a prayer space in a residential hall.
So, Maria, you were talking about employers and supporting students. We had another question from Twitter from Laura Lambeth that asked, what are some ways that student affairs employers can support student staff? So I'm thinking she's speaking hall directors and RAs or that kind of thing to help prepare them for that post-college job search. Do any of you have thoughts on this job search question?
Heather, I'd love to circle back to the earlier question for a moment, if I could, and then maybe move to this one. Somebody else knows. So one of the things that so the earlier question is, in what ways can student affairs staff better support Muslim students? So I think a very important way, in addition to what Faran said about accommodations issues and open discussion, is what I would call imaginative empathy when it comes to Muslim identity or religious identity in general. And I think student affairs staffs do such a good job of this when it comes to other dimensions of identity. So, for example, as the volume on the prevalence of sexual assault has increased, and we know just how prevalent it is and just how ugly it is and what kind of scenarios it happens in, their student affairs staff have imaginative empathy for a freshman woman at a frat party. They have a sense of what it might feel like to be that woman, right? As there's been illumination on interactions between communities of color and the police, we have developed imaginative empathy about what it might be like to be a black student coming back onto campus and having to go through the security gate and the kind of questions that he might be asked by the security officer. As we have learned more about gay suicide, we have developed imaginative empathy about what it might be like for a 19-year-old from a small town to come out. Well, when you hear presidential candidates compare Muslims to rabid dogs, have an imaginative empathy about how the student named Fatima on your floor or the student named Hamza on your floor might feel about that being in the atmosphere, right? Simply having imaginative empathy about how a Muslim student might feel in the poisonous Islamophobic atmosphere in which we live, and just like reaching out and being like, hey man, I noticed that you pray around noon every day, and that indicates to me that, or you kind of scurry off to a quiet space. That indicates to me you're a Muslim. I just want to let you know that I appreciate that, and I'm supportive of it. And if you need, someone to check in with about that, I'm here. And by the way, I find Islam a beautiful tradition, and I'd love to know more. And if you have 30 minutes to tell me more, I'd love to hear. I mean, like, that goes so far in the life of an 18-year-old. It's unbelievable, right? Student affairs staffs have developed this powerful radar screen around diverse identities, and what follows from that is imaginative empathy, and to do it around religious identity and diversity, I think, is very important and extremely timely.
This is so great, because we just had a fabulous question I think really relates to this, is that how do we, Derek Bundy asked this, how do we identify ourselves as supporters and advocates for Muslim students? So how do we let them know that we care? And then Nikki Rudolph also asked, how can we help kind of lift the burden, mediate the campus climate impacts? Faran, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think one of the first ways to show that you're a supporter is to understand, when I see a Muslim student, people automatically jump to that religious identity. And I think one thing that you have to realize as a person that's want to support something is that you have to realize that these are students and they have the same needs as other students. And so going in with the conversation that, what are you studying? Conversations, stuff like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Those are the ways how you can really make a Muslim student feel comfortable, because they're not so much focusing on that elephant in the room, that it's your religious identity. And so once you establish that trust and honesty, it goes a long way where you can have conversations about the religion and how they can support that. I think another way is to being able to do that research beforehand and kind of know the basic terms before going into that, if you're talking about the religious identity. So knowing that the 5 pillars of Islam, knowing that Muslims pray 5 times a day, know that Ramadan, that's where Muslims fast, know there's a testimony of faith, know that Hajj is a Muslim pilgrimage. Those goes a long way with the students in terms of that, hey, you've taken it upon yourself to kind of learn about the faith, even if it's the basis, and that is really a great way to know that you've actually looked it up yourself without anybody prompting you to do that, to learn about that. I think that goes a long way of supporting students, because if I have someone that comes to me and kind of mentions like, oh, have you done Hajj before? Oh, you pray 5 times a day, and mentions that to me, I get more enlightened because, oh, that person knows a little bit. Let's have a conversation about it, and so that way I can learn about that individual, and they can learn more about myself.
That's great. Maria, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, kind of tying the 3 or 4 questions that were asked on Twitter. Going back to the first one, I think the most important part is to not trivialize little things that may seem like little things to many people, especially with like a roommate situation. This has happened to somebody I know. They wore the scarf, the hijab, and their roommate was always joking, "I'm going to take your picture when you're sleeping." Even though they were joking, that girl's like, "Oh my God, what if she really does? What if I get her mad and she just does it?" And then being able to go to the RA and not just have the RA be like, "Oh, she's not going to do it," but actually take it as a serious issue. Other simple things that Muslims often joke about is like, "Oh, they caught me with a foot in the sink." So they may be washing to get ready to pray, and then we also have to wash our feet before we pray. And a lot of people don't know that. Then you're just walking into somebody and they're washing their feet. So having some kind of programming or just a casual session where a Muslim student or a speaker can come in and talk about the basics. So like Faran said, those basics are sometimes we think people just know. We take it for granted, like, oh, everybody knows to pray 5 times a day, but not everybody does know that. So giving that space to the student to be like, hey, and then a good way to start that maybe be social media, because there is this whole global connection. If you have Snapchat, they did the whole Hajj on Snapchat, so that was a lot of my students were like, oh, I saw on Snapchat, have you been to Hajj, and what is Hajj? So that was a good conversation starter to be able to do some kind of programming, and like Faran said, not to focus just on the religious aspect, but to collaborate. I know we did a program in undergrad, it was related to recycling. So we had a Muslim speaker who talks about being green and what Islam says about being green, talk during this whole month of, the environment. And so it wasn't just, oh, you're Muslim, you're going to only talk about Islam or being Muslim, but things that encompass every human being. So that way there is that, hey, we are all in this together. So collaboration, programming, and not trivializing little things. And going to the job question just before I stop, I think what career services in general could do is have a whole, a series or something about identity, intersectionality, and diversity. Because I don't feel like students are always prepared, regardless of what identity that they may be sharing on their resume or in an interview, or that they can't not share because it may be just visible and physical, and how to navigate that, right? So it's not just, oh, you're Muslim and it's on your resume, but what if, we know there's studies on if you have a name that sounds black, it's, there's there's less chance of getting called back and all that. So how do you navigate all of that? So just having programming for that as well, so all students are prepared for what's coming at them after graduation.
Can I add one more piece?
Sure.
One thing that I always really want to advocate is that service is a really big component of our field of higher education and student affairs, but it's also a big component of our religion too. And so something that I really, if you want to support something, go volunteer with the local Muslim students that you have there, whether through the Muslim Student Association, and that's an opportunity, a space where, one, you can do service to the community, but also where you can learn about that individual, whether it be their religious identity, their cultural identity, or them as just a person. I mean, we had a program at LSU last year where we had the Muslim Student Association actually volunteer at a veterans place, and an opportunity where it was like a media site, so we actually had the media show, and so it was a great piece for the Muslim students to break that perception where, oh, they're volunteering at a veterans place. That's something that, they are getting positive media thing, like they're volunteering, and people are learning more about it. And because of that event, people reached out to the MSA at LSU to do different events. And so service is a great way, if you're a student professional or just a regular individual in higher education, to get to know this person and advocate for the person.
I think that's 100% right, and actually that's what we have found at Interfaith Youth Core, over doing this, running religious diversity programs in partnership with college campuses for 13 years, is that interfaith service learning projects are probably the single best way to support diverse religious identities, including atheist and humanist identities, to nurture positive relationships, and to commit to the common good. If you go to our website, ifyc.org, we have a bunch of interfaith service learning resources for folks. We also run Interfaith Leadership Institutes, where we have campus delegations come to Atlanta in January, Chicago in August, and we train folks over the course of a 3-day institute in developing interfaith service learning campaigns on their campuses. So just want to snaps to Faran for mentioning that, and just to let you know that we have a bunch of resources on our site for that.
We will tweet out that link right now. Thank you so much for mentioning that. That's what I had read in a couple of the articles as well. So that service piece, coming together, working on a project together, goes a long way. So I want to ask one more question before I get to final thoughts, because I am really conscious of the fact that people are unaware of Christian privilege, and that Christian privilege kind of exudes all over our campus. So Hamza, can you talk a little bit about how we can work within the culture to not only bring awareness to that, but also make either small personal changes and larger campus-wide changes to hopefully bring more religious inclusion, and specifically of Muslim students on campus?
All right. I feel like that there's already several great strides being made in this area. Specifically, I want to highlight the work that's being done by International Student Support here at Ryerson University. They host regular mixers for various ethnic populations. They've also got an emergency bursary for students who've been affected by global conflicts and incidents. Their international committee creates awareness of different religious and ethnic populations, and ultimately they just strive to be like this home away from home. And one specific event that comes to mind is their International Tea House series, which invites all students and members of the community to experience culture from a specific region and engage in dialogues about various facets and nuances of that country. Last but not least, I think solidarity from senior leadership goes a long way. It models behavior, and I know that a few years ago, Ann Coulter was slated to speak at the University of Ottawa here in Canada, and I know we're not ones to limit freedom of speech up here, obviously, but anyone who's familiar with Ann knows that she's inflammatory and can be downright offensive at times, outright or even move in that direction. The provost stepped up and wrote a really strongly worded open letter to Ann, and little gestures go a long way. And just riffing off on what Faran said earlier, show up to MSA events, tweet out an Eid greeting, fast with us for a day. The little things.
Great. So as kind of our final thoughts today, I'd like you each, based on your own experience and also based on the Muslim college students with whom you interact on your campuses or within your work, what would you like the audience of Student Affairs Live to know? We have lots of people watching today. We've had a fabulous Twitter conversation. Thanks for all of you. What should support systems for Muslim students look like if we are going to truly build campus supports that acknowledge their presence and create community? Hamza, do you want to start?
I kind of want to just quickly go back to something that Eboo mentioned earlier. He was talking about cycle, and I think as student affairs professionals, as well-informed citizens and seekers of knowledge, it's probably really hard to remain objective and critical when Muslims are portrayed so negatively in the media. I think the cycle is designed in some ways to be overwhelming, and as a marketer, I completely understand why news outlets do what they do, but as a critic of media and somebody who's striving to be more responsible with my media diet, I have to be careful with my inputs. Too much news from low quality or just a handful of sources can be damaging in the long run. It can affect the way that we think, the way that we speak, and create a sort of othering of Muslims. So it's up to everyone to become just more media literate. And two foundational texts that I revisit once every few years are George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I mean, timeless in their appeal, but they help me to personally get my bearings straight in a world where authentic portrayals of Muslims are hard to come by. I don't think I answered the question, but
no, that's a good. Resources are always good. Faran?
One thing that I've been saying this throughout this conversation is, one, is to not really focusing on the religious aspect or the cultural aspect, but just them as a person. And so I really want student affairs people to realize that the best way that you can support someone is recognize what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what those aspirations of those Muslim students are. And that goes a long way where you can have conversations about their religious identity, of how they can help people. I mean, I have a link that I just put into the post, but it's about what college Muslim students want you to know. And they want you to know that, hey, we're students just like you and I and everyone else. And so that's what I want student affairs to take away from all this, is that these are students that you need to. And so going in with that kind of lens and that perspective whenever you have conversations, and to come in with a culture of understanding and learning. So go to those MSA events. And if you want to find information, go look up information about the faith through authentic, credible sources. Go to the mosque and learn about it from the faith from that source. I think that's the best way that you can learn about what Muslim students are going through is from the source. And so that's what I hope student affairs professionals can take away from this.
Right, Maria.
I would say to take it upon yourself as a professional and as a person, as personal development, is to get to know somebody who's Muslim. And sometimes you may have to just be like, hey, I know nothing about you. And this could be it doesn't necessarily have to be a student, and probably shouldn't be, but maybe a colleague or somebody in the community where you can reach out and just be like, I am trying to develop, so I would like to, take you out for lunch. Get to know them on a personal level. I think, there's all this research from the Pew Research Center on most people who fear a Muslim don't know a Muslim. So getting that first step out there, then automatically you're going to have that empathy. You're going to have, an awareness of what some students may be facing and be able to address that. So just getting yourself out there and making yourself vulnerable, and that's the first step.
Eboo, final thoughts from you.
Sure. Three things. Number one, imaginative empathy. Thinking about what it might feel like to be a Muslim student at this time right now. Thinking about what it might feel like to need a place to pray at noontime, about what it might feel like to have people saying that Syrian refugees are rabid dogs. Just imaginative empathy. Number two, appreciative knowledge. Ask yourself, do you know 5 books by African American writers? Do you know 5 books by female writers? Do you know 5 books by gay writers? Do you know 5 books by Muslim writers? Right? There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Muslims created the longest running university in the world, Al-Azhar. We've created some of the great cities of the world thousands of years ago. Islam is a great intellectual civilization. We have heroes ranging from Muhammad Ali to Hassan Minhaj right now, right? Do you know some of these folks? Do you have an appreciative knowledge of Islam? In other words, do you know things about the tradition that you would consider beautiful or positive or a contribution to human civilization? And number 3 is interfaith engagement, especially interfaith service projects. Supporting Muslims in their identities in kind of a bubble or a vacuum. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to make sure that Muslims have a place to pray. But I think it's an even better thing to add to that. Do Muslims have opportunities to engage positively with other students in ways that they are expressing their values, like service, and able to speak about their tradition in ways that other people are going to develop appreciative knowledge. And I think interfaith service projects are the best way to accomplish that.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I am so grateful to the 4 of you. We have tweeted out several of the things that you've mentioned, and we'll continue to add to that list and post them on the post related to this site. If people are watching this after the fact, we'll make sure that those links are available. So again, I appreciate all of you being here today, sharing your wisdom, talking with us about what we need to be thinking about and doing and acting upon as student affairs professionals to create climates for religious inclusion on campus for Muslim students. I want to acknowledge also our sponsors of Student Affairs Live and my friend Alex for following along on the back channel and making sure we get all of the tweets retweeted. Just to give you a little preview for upcoming shows, next week on December 9th, my colleague Tony Duty will be hosting an episode about fraternities and sororities, where he will be talking with AFA Executive Director Mark Kepsel, AFA Board Member Michelle Guabati, and AFA Foundation Member Amy Voida about timely issues and challenges facing that population as well. And Tony and I will be taking a few weeks off, but we'll be back in 2016 with more great episodes of Student Affairs Live. So if you have any suggested topics that you would like to see, both Tony and I would like to continue conversations that we've already started as well. You can receive reminders about all of the things that we do here on Higher Ed Live by subscribing to our newsletter. You can browse our archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to our iTunes podcast to listen to past episodes. Again, I'm Heather Shea Gasser. Thank you for watching, everybody. Keep learning and make it a great week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.